Right, so just a couple of days to go before the Comrades Marathon in 2025, and we thought it would be a good opportunity to talk to the man who coaches so many of the Comrades runners, not only from those at the sharp end of the field, but those towards the back as well. And welcome to Lindsey Parry, Coach Parry, the official Comrades Marathon coach. And Lindsey, how many years have you been doing this job as the official Comrades coach now?
Yeah, so my first started in 2006, Mike, and you were actually rather instrumental on getting me appointed through your common friend now, I guess, Renee Smith then. Um, yeah, so 2016. So the first official race that I was coach for was 2017. So it's a long time. I think this is the 17th race that I am involved with.
When you first started coaching Comrades runners, give us an idea of how you think coaching has changed and developed in those years that you've been working. How do you think you've changed your methodology around the way that you coach Comrades runners?
So one of the biggest things came with this increasing technology, specifically around the GPS. GPS was there when I started, um, but it wasn't super accessible, and it came with a massive gadget which you had to strap onto your arm. And so the kind of specificity of prescription has changed a lot. And then my little tricks that I used to use to try and get people to run easier. Anybody who knows me knows that that's like honestly one of the things I've never stopped trying to get people to do their easy stuff easier. So the tricks to do that got not harder, but you had to get more creative, because now it's as useful as it is to know exactly what you're doing, it actually makes it more performance driven because
Mm,
now you can physically see in real time what speed am I running? What is this? How far have I gone? How far do I want to go? So I'd say that
mm.
those are the biggest kind of changes. And then like with that went like a gross overcomplication where people literally can't do anything without a watch. And now we're kind of getting back into this phase where we're trying to teach people again to feel some things for themselves, because on race day, I would say that's one of the best attributes a runner can have is that ability to just know, like, am I on the right track, doing the right thing? And to be honest, one of the things you wanted to chat about today falls like bang into that
Mm.
wheelhouse of knowing, like, how do I feel? Is this sustainable? So that's kind of just relearning feel, how running on feel.
Because essentially the course doesn't change much. You're either going to have down or an up run, and the course stays relatively the same. There's obviously a few changes every single year. So every year, do you tweak the way that you do your programs and find ways to make the journey more educational for the runners that you're coaching? I mean, how do you tweak things each year to keep on improving?
Yeah, so just in terms of the larger kind of education thing, yes. I mean, I sort of hit on themes year to year. Um, to be honest, weird how these things happen, but I would say that 2023 probably was an amazing year. Kind of was stuck in a bit of a groove. Is it, how passionate am I still about coaching the runners? But kind of mirroring the changes that have happened at Comrades over the last 2 years, my own enthusiasm. So this year's been amazing from that point of view, and just kind of getting back onto learning different aspects of the race. And this year, that's been the theme, is literally how do you run Comrades and use the actual route of Comrades to run the race to the best of your ability. And then to answer your question, that comes into right the preparation. Yeah, and there's slight tweaks over time. So like one of the things that I'm very aware of now is that the biggest danger to any runner is this overdoing it, getting injured, being sick, and therefore not being able to start or not being able to finish Comrades because you are injured or sick. And I think to your point, like kind of how do things evolve slightly in your mind? The biggest change for this year's training plans, for example, would be this idea of when you were training for Comrades, we were training for it at the same time. Our exposure on a long run is not the same.
Mm,
So yes, we both have to cover 90 kilometers, but we have a very similar kind of point of no return or diminishing return, which is in and around the sort of three, certainly maximum 4 hour mark. So when we
mm,
get to 4 hours of running, whether we're training for a 12-hour Comrades or whether we're training for 5 hour Comrades, the physiological adaptations and physical adaptations that we're looking for to run a successful Comrades start to deteriorate from around about that point.
mm,
And so that's kind of been this biggest shift for me, is to really try and get people to understand that a 60K long run for the Oaks training for gold, and for those that want a Bill Rohn, and for those that want a Robert Machali, they aren't the same, and that
mm,
we don't all need a 60-kilometer run.
mm,
And so I think that's kind of to that point.
mm,
Those are the sort of things that then every year I try and often in the things that I still continuously learn from feedback from how my own athletes do, and analyzing kind of where we were compared to previous years. Those things do filter into those plans then, and they generally subtle. I mean, we kind of have a good idea of how many kilometers we want to get to in total. I've got a pretty good idea of when I want people to be working on building their strength for hills on the up run versus the down run, but the nature of those things changes ever so slightly as we go from year to year.
mm. Well, let's get into the meat of what we're going to talk about today. And this is something that's been discussed on a couple of our social media platforms. And I thought it would be a good chance to kind of interview about this. But there's always this discussion, whether it's a 10K or a marathon and Comrades Marathon, Two Oceans, all the different distances that you must try and aim for a negative split. And for those of you that don't know what a negative split is, it's essentially running the second half faster than you run the first half. And I'm in two minds about this because having been involved in running for many years, I've always been a bit skeptical about the idea that you can run a negative split. And it certainly thinks I think it gets harder the longer you go. In Comrades, it feels like running a negative split is only possible for the very best runners right at the top of the field, and that for those of us doing anything more than 8 hours, it's it's a dream. Where do you sit on this view on negative splits in a race the length of Comrades?
So look, I've had so many people run negative splits now that I work with personally, that for me it's the only sensible way to run Comrades. And in not giving yourself the opportunity to run a negative split, you are in essence part of what I call a self-fulfilling prophecy. So there's been a few things that I've like kind of beat the drum on hard over the years in Comrades, and this is certainly the thing that's been the hardest to convince people. There will be no denying that. But when I started in 2006, honestly, I think if there were 100 people running a negative split, that's enormous. I mean, I'll be surprised if there were more than 10.
And that you're talking about
And
the whole field.
yes, I'm talking
Yeah,
about the whole field. And
yeah.
so what I really have enjoyed over the last 2 years is that there has actually been like a proper, I don't know, buy-in is the only word I can use, because I wish I'd gotten the exact number. But Stuart Mann loves to run his stats, and before him, Mark Dowswell did a lot of it. I think that he probably still does, but maybe just not as much noise around his stuff. But certainly last year, I think the number was over 1,000 negative splits, and a lot of those being females. So, and that's on an up run. And if you look at the profile of the down run, and I'm going to share some numbers with you just now as we, back and forth a little bit about this, but it's a question of how you approach the race. And, we, I still build in a sort of fatigue factor. So I go, right, well, you're never going to be able to run the downs the same way we run the downs when we are training in our everyday week. But even with like a 2% fatigue factor, which, altitude has about a 4% impact, which is massive. So I think 2% is a pretty big allowance for people slowing down. Even taking that into account, you should still be running the last 30 Ks of Comrades fast enough to do a negative split. And, my best ones are 9, 11, 13, 14. So those are the size of the negative splits that I regularly get from our female runners. And I think that
Just
is,
explain what you mean by the 2%, 4% thing. Let me sort of maybe feed it back to you, so maybe I'm understanding it properly. If you say 2%, are you saying the fatigue factor in the latter half of the race should be 2%? In other words, should be running 2% slower per kilometer in the second half compared to the first half? Or I'm not really sure what you mean by
no, so
that.
you are understanding correctly, but you're comparing comrades to comrades. Whereas,
Yeah.
so when I say, like, if you live in Cape Town and you come to Johannesburg and you run in a race,
Hmm.
you are going to lose about 4% performance. So if you're running um
Hmm.
4
Just
minutes a K,
yeah.
you're gonna be 410. So I'm just the maths is probably not great,
Based on the altitude. Yeah. Yeah.
based on the altitude. So now what I'm saying is that if you had to run the downs at Comrades, but you went then um 3 weeks ago and you just did a 20K training run for the last 20Ks of Comrades, when you get there on the 8th of June, you will run those 2% slower than you would have run them 2 weeks ago, because the fatigue will have an impact. But
Right.
the impact shouldn't be as big as it is, because you shouldn't have to walk as much as most people need to walk in the second half.
Sure. To be honest, that's a number that I thought would be much higher in the second half. Having run a few ultras myself, 2% feels like the drop off in that second half feels way more than that. So obviously it's about how you plan the first half.
Yeah, so let me quickly share some numbers with you. These are net values, okay? They aren't
Mhm.
gross values. So what does the net value mean? It means that in the when you use the GPX file to calculate these things, some kilometers have a little bit of up and a little bit of down. And so the number that I'm getting at the end there is the difference of those. But the net values for the first 30 kilometers of Comrades, okay? 390 meters of climbing in the first 30 Ks. That's 46% of all the climbing that you need to do at Comrades. You've got 250 meters of descent, so 17% of the climb. In the next 30 Ks, 30 to 60 Ks, you've got 350 meters of climbing, so 41% of the climbing. So that means by the time you get to 60 Ks, okay, once you've just about to run down Fields Hill, you have done 87% of all the ascent that you're going to do at Comrades. But in that same 30 Ks, you've got 480 meters of descent. So from 30 Ks onwards, you have got more descent than climbing.
Mm.
And then finally, in the last 30 kilometers, or 29.98, if we want to get very specific, you've got 115 meters of climbing, but you've got 716 meters of descending. Okay, 50% of all the descending is in the second half. So,
Mm.
really, what your entire race strategy should be about is accepting that when you get to 23 Ks in particular, because that's Umlaas Road, it's the highest point on the course, and almost all of that 23 Ks has been uphill, you have to be behind. Now, most runners have an idea of what the average pace is that they need to run, plus they have this idea that they are going to lose time in the final 20 kilometers.
Mm.
And so they battle their way to starting to shove time in the bag on the hardest part of the course. And I can tell you, running in the dark in particular, in my early days of running Comrades, I would never understand why I was working so hard to run the splits that I needed to. And it's when you look at those numbers, it's just so obvious. It's because that is the hardest part of the course. In the middle third, interestingly, you have a lot of downhill, and almost all of the climbing comes in two parts, which in total account for less than 9 kilometers.
Hmm.
Of that, probably accounts for about 7.5. So
Hmm.
7.5 kilometers of those 30 Ks are very hard, and you can do them as slowly as you like. But you should be coming back. And that next 30 Ks is when you start to pull back on your average time. And then, of course, if you've managed this whole situation correctly and you are running most, and again, you will carry on doing some walking. But as soon as you get to the point where you've got to walk a whole K, or your breaks go from being 1 minute to 5 minutes, that's when you get to this point where the number is much bigger than 2%. It's probably closer to 8%. And that's where the kind of old adage comes from. 1 minute too fast in the first half equals 8 minutes slower in the second
Mm.
half. And so it is a tight balance, but what's very encouraging
Mm.
for me is that we have now 1,500 people that can look you in the eye and say, I ran a negative split on the up run. And so if you can do it on the up run, you've just got to be brave enough to do those first 30. That's the key. You got to do the first 30 easy enough.
All right. So let's say, for instance, I'm a 11-hour guy. And just to give you some time. So what? So if you're running 11 hours, you're running what, 7 minutes a K or something like that? Um,
Yeah,
was that
that sounds right. I'll
roughly
give
the
you
average pace, something like that?
it is right, but I'm gonna
Just
just
check it up exactly. Just to give people an idea, when you talk about that
yeah.
average pace, about that first 30 kilometers. So if you're running 7 minutes a K,
Seven, 7:15, like just over 7:15. So
yeah,
that's the number.
that's the number if you were running average pace for a sub 11 hours. Is that right?
Yeah.
So if you are looking at your splits then and that first 30 Ks, what would you recommend people should be doing that at to give themselves enough in the bag?
Are you sitting down for this? So the first 5 Ks will be run at pretty close to 8 minutes per K.
Hmm.
And then you'll settle the next 5 Ks or you've got poly shorts in the next 5 Ks. So that will be much closer to your average of 7:17. Then to 15 Ks, where you've got little polys in that one at the beginning of it. That's about 7:20 average for that 5K. The next 20Ks is about 7:45 average. And then
Sure.
after that, it starts to chop down. Then you get 7:17, 7:19.
Hmm.
As we go up in Chunga, that section is the 7:30. Plunging down into halfway is 7:02. Climbing out of halfway, you 7:36 again, and then we get faster, 7:05. You get you're from
Hmm.
65 to 70, you just under 7. 75K is 7:15, so on and so forth. And I've
Hmm.
even built in a proper fade over the last 5Ks, because what does happen is over the last 5Ks, you've been running downhill forever. Okay. And now, now suddenly you have to run under your own steam over these few gentle rollers. And so
Mm.
I fully expect people to then slow right down
Mm.
and to lose 15, 20 seconds a K then for those last 5Ks.
So, I mean, it sounds to me, it feels like it's a perfect world where we can do this negative split. And as you say, if you pace yourself correctly, I think the question that comes to mind for me is that, is it your body's going to naturally fatigue? We know that. It doesn't matter how fit you are going to fatigue if you're spending a lot of time on the road. So you're going to have to, you have to keep that in mind. I guess anybody doing comrades, you suffer, especially people who haven't got a lot of experience in it, will go into this race thinking, I don't feel secure enough to run so much slower in that first 20 Ks when I'm feeling the strongest. So how do you talk to your athletes to convince them that this is what they should do? Because it's hard in your brain to say, hey, if I do what Lindsay says, I know he's probably right, but geez, if I'm just slightly ahead of time at 30 k's, then I've got a bit more time banked in when I'm fading badly in the second half.
It's a little bit harder with novices because novices haven't experienced it at all, but most people have experienced comrades, and so when I can physically show them, because they'll use expressions like, "No, but I can't run any slow. I've tried to run slow, but I can't run any slower." But when I physically show them how slowly they run in the second half, and show them how it's directly related to how quickly they went in the second half. That tends to be the one thing that gets people to swing around. And in the early years, to be honest, it was quite impossible. So what I will do with a new client, for example, that I'm working with, is that okay, I'm never going to get this person to go full blown negative split. I know that because we are human beings and we're quite resilient, small mistakes are forgiven. Okay. And particularly when it comes to running, it's normally 2-3 mistakes that we make on race day that lead to a complete disaster. So,
Mm,
okay, if the only mistake we're going to make all day is that we're going to go a little bit too quick through halfway. So, what is that forgivable number for me? It's 2 to 3 minutes. So, if
sure.
you are so now 2 to 3
And this is
minutes
you're talking
in
about 11. You're talking about 11-hour person here, because
yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah.
not much. Yeah.
No, 100%. It's not much, but it's enough for them to be like, okay, I'm in the realms of where I'm supposed to be. And I have found that 2 to 3 minutes is I would call that just about positive splitting. Okay.
Mm, mm,
Um, it I'll tell you another trick when I'm finished this explanation, but I can't use it this year because halfway is halfway. But so 2 to 3 minutes is it's forgiving, particularly on the down run. The you get away with that sort of thing. And then, of course, when they feel much better in the second half, and this is the key, is that they'll be like, hang on, how much better did I feel in this comrades than I've ever felt before? And then you get this the belief and the gearing starts. And that next time I sat and had coffee with some clients uh, last week where I was delighted that they told me, no, I don't think you've been conservative enough. So I had to go and redo their plan. So they're going to go through halfway even slower than I wanted them to. And I was like, this is what I. So and I guess what I'm saying there is that as you get people to try it and they experience the positive benefits in the second half, next time out they are in and they are inclined to believe you. Now, we know that Comrades is it's a traditional point, right? So
mm.
Drummond is Drummond, whether we run 86 Ks or whether we run 92 Ks. So some years I can trick people into running negative splits because halfway is not halfway at all. So
Yeah.
I can kind of fudge the stats sometimes, and people don't even know that I'm sending them out in negative splits. But that's really it. It's this slow kind of try this. Okay, you normally go through 15 minutes too fast. Well, let's at least go with 10 minutes too fast.
Mm.
5 minutes too fast. But I find the line is around about 3 minutes. If you more than 3 minutes too fast, that means you will add 20 minutes on to your second half time.
And if you are, I mean, I keep on, I suppose I'm banging on about this a bit, but if you are looking at a time and you say, right, based on what my expectations are, I'm a sub 11, should you plan to run a 10:45 if instead of a sub 11, so that so that the whole plan is around a 10:45 finish, so you've given yourself a bit of buffer? Or do you plan it to say, I'm a sub 11 guy, I've got a plan for sub 11 rather than 15 minutes better?
The people who are on the edge. So if you truly are a 11 hour, so if we run the numbers, we look at your marathon time, we look at the number of kilometers you've run. If you are a 10:55 to 11 person and you go for 10:45, you're running 11:15 to 11:30. Like
Mm,
that I guarantee, and probably closer to 11:30 because the hard thing in comrades is that once the time is gone, there is literally no incentive to dig in,
mm,
and you then just let your time drift. So no,
mm.
I would only do that And we do get a lot of those. We get people who come to us and say, "Oh, I only want a 950 or 955. And just want to get under 10 hours." And I'll run all their numbers and I'll go, "You should be doing a 940. So let's plan on a 940." And you know what? It just means that in the last 10Ks you can be more relaxed because you know that you are.
Mm,
So I only do that with people if I'm not. I will never knowingly send someone on a kamikaze mission. So if you
mm,
borderline, your best chance of making it is literally being on the edge, which is
mm,
stressful. I mean, it's hard, 11 to be worried about whether you're going to get your time for
mm.
that length of time. It's not easy. That there's no question. It's not easy.
And the worst, I mean, it's easy. It's relatively easy to say that if you miss sub 11 or a sub 10, it's sad that you haven't got a medal, but you're still finishing. But those that are looking close to sub 12, that's obviously disastrous if they miss that because they're not
Yeah.
finishers.
It's honestly one of the hardest things to do in running is to be on the edge all day long. It's one of the reasons why I really do like the new cutoffs for comrades. I mean, we can argue that they're miles too generous, fine, but to my mind, it's the fact that it's taking one less stress out of those runners' minds because
Mm,
one of your body doesn't differentiate stress. Stress is stress. So now, if you are stressing at each cutoff, you have this massive stress on your mind about whether you're just going to get through cutoff. That adds to your fatigue. It adds to your mental fatigue. It adds to you kind of your willpower being broken down slowly but surely as the day
mm,
progresses. So from that point of view, it's actually really nice that runners only have to worry about one cutoff now, and that's the final cutoff.
mm.
That said, try not to use Parkinson's law and fill up all the time. Just because you've got it 6.5 hours to get to halfway, please don't use.
Don't use it.
That's not the kind of negative split that I'm talking about.
That's just cutoff for the race so they can clear the roads. It's not your cutoff.
100%. Yeah.
And then just finally, I mean, I think a lot of runners this week will be looking at their training and they're looking at their marathon times and all that sort of thing. And they'll be thinking, okay, so what is a realistic pacing plan for me? Can you just give us a bit of a précis about some of the things that you need to look at around being realistic about what your finishing
Yeah.
time should be on Sunday?
Yeah, so that's pretty cool, and it's quite easy to do. I think like a fairly good rule of thumb is that your finishers want to be the 800-ish mark, not too much over 1,000. Your Bill Roans are in and around that 1,000. Your Robert Macharlies are like 1,000, 1,200. Your Bill Rowans are 1,200 to 1,600. And then obviously your silver guys will be on a very specific program and be anywhere between 1,800 and 2,600. But yeah, so
Mm,
that gives you a really nice rough idea that if your kilometers are matching up, and then yeah, the good old 3 hours for silver, 3:35 to 3:40 for Bill Rowan, 4 hours
mm,
for Robert Macharlie, 4:25 to 4:30 for
mm,
um not a finisher for a bronze, and then yeah,
mm.
everyone else who qualified, you looking at a between 11 and a 12-hour finish.
Okay, so I mean, just so give us an idea. So if I'm a sub 11 guy, do I take my marathon time and what do I do with that?
Yeah, so if you're you want to run 11 hours,
Hmm.
11 divided by 2.5, it comes out at about 4:25. So if you kind of within 10-minute ballpark of that, then we know you've got the ability for the 11 hour. Have you done around about 1,000 Ks, a little bit more in training? Then I'd
Hmm.
say you're pretty close. That's kind of you're on the right track. Yeah.
And there's no, I mean, you don't use like a 5K time or anything like that as a
Look,
as a basis.
you can, but if I'm using shorter distance times, I like to have a few
Mm,
times so that I can see if I'm dealing with someone who tends to improve as they go longer or someone who
mm,
gets
mm,
slow as
mm,
they go longer. In fact, I had a call with someone today that is exactly in the former. They kind of blow out as they go longer. So if I had to use their 5K time, I would have them on finishing in 11 hours. But when
Mm.
I look at their kind of range of times and then I extrapolate, then I actually get a best case scenario for them of 11:40 and a
Wow.
likely of 11:50. So that's like a 40-minute
Wow.
blowout. So that's why the marathon is the most accurate, because it's the closest in distance.
Yeah.
But if you're using shorter distances, then so if someone gives me their short distance times from now and then gives me their PBs all the way across, I'll be able to tell
Mm.
them whether that they need to just be a little bit more conservative or if they can
Mm.
afford to be a bit more aggressive.
Mm. Yeah, because I think a lot of runners, they would have peaked out probably 2 weeks ago in terms of their training. They would have run a marathon maybe a couple of months ago. So I guess the thing is to say, right, my marathon time was then. Hopefully I'm going to be fitter than my marathon, but I could be worse. And therefore you have to kind of say, have I been consistently training since that marathon? And if it's gone better, I can still be. I mean, I guess that's the question. You should be fitter than your marathon in theory. Therefore, do you still use your marathon time as a good gauge? Is that just a conservative way of looking at it?
I'd still lean on it. That'll be
Mm,
my starting point, and then to the exact. So when people come
mm,
to the expo and buy pacing charts or ask advice,
mm,
this is literally the exact conversation we're having now is what I'll have. It'll be
mm,
like, cool, that was in February, or
mm,
it'll be someone who trained very specifically for a marathon,
mm,
say in October, then I would still lean heavily on that as the basis for their potential. And then the questions will come in. Okay, what have you done your time trials in? Or have you
mm,
done a good half marathon recently? What's been
mm,
your kilometers year to date, etc. And then
mm.
we kind of narrow it down.
Yeah, yeah. So just for those of you who are going to be at Comrades, Lindsay, just tell us where you're going to be, and I'm assuming you're going to have your Coach Parry stand where people can come and talk to you.
Yeah, so we'll have a Coach Parry stand. It's just off from the food court, so super easy to find us. Just find us
Mm,
at the food court. We've got really nice big teardrop banners, and there's also a stage there where I'll be giving talk around the route, so very specific details on the route, and then how to pace yourself using that route. So,
mm,
yeah, some of the things we've spoken about here, and I'll be there pretty much all day, every day. If I'm not there, one of my team will be there. I'll obviously take a few breaks during the day, but I'm not running Comrades. So I will be there for the vast majority of the 3 days. So come and say hi, and looking forward to everyone getting to Durban safely. So please travel safely if you need to travel. Mark, are we seeing you in Durban this year?
Yep, I'll be
Oh,
there
awesome.
as one of the announcers. So you'll hear
Oh,
me,
brilliant.
but you won't see me.
Well, I mean, we could hopefully have that long overdue water we've been
Yes,
threatening to
we
have. That'll be good.
have.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, Lindsay, thanks very much for your
Yeah.
time.
Cool. Big pleasure.